Well, greetings to you. I'd like to talk to you today about personality disorders. And I'll come on to that in a minute. When I was a young man, I thought that if people got to be Prime Minister or they climbed the top of the greasy political pole, or indeed any other sphere, became billionaires, whatever, I always assumed that they had something slightly more in them than most ordinary folk like myself. They had a little bit more. And that's the reason that they got to the top. But as I've grown older, I've realised that that isn't actually the case. Certainly in politics, it's my experience that those that get to the top have a little bit less. They have a little bit less. They're not fully formed as human beings. They lack things like empathy or sympathy or moral compass. They lack all these things that most of us have to some extent. Most of us aren't perfect, of course, but most of us live by, we don't necessarily go to church every week or whatever, but we tend to live by Christian rules in a Christian country. Do as you would be done by, I think you'd agree, broadly speaking. But we seem to have politicians that don't follow these basic rules of life. And of course, I could go through them one by one, but I'm not going to do that. I just want to talk about one, and he's the man in charge, Boris Johnson. And I believe that he has a personality disorder, which is why he comes to some of the conclusions and makes some of the decisions that he does. And I gather that his headmaster at Eton slightly hinted at that. The trouble was with Boris, that he was too self-centred. He really only cared about Boris. And you could say, well, isn't that true of most politicians? And I suppose you'd be right. But Boris particularly so. I'm just going to go through some of the decision-making processes he's made since he took office. And I think most of them will endorse the fact that I think that they show a personality disorder. Now, I'm not suggesting that he is a psychopath or a sociopath or schizophrenic, for you must make up your own mind about that, because actually, if you actually look into these things, it's fairly subjective. So if you look all the terms and references up of those things that I've just mentioned and see where you would put him in the scale of things. Of course, he could be a schizophrenic with two personalities, one of which is sociopathic and one of which is psychopathic, but I don't know. Let's just go through, and I've just made a few notes, and they're not necessarily in the order of any importance, but I think one of the most important things, though perhaps I might argue, you may not agree, that when we were beginning lockdown, and I've made this point on videos before, and he closed the pubs, he says, pubs don't provide a necessary service. Well, there are widows and widowers and people who get to the end of the week if they're working, and the pub is their only release. The only time they talk to people other than the fact that they go shopping, or people at work, perhaps, or old age pensioners who don't talk to anybody at all, maybe for the entire week. And a man could actually say that pubs don't provide a necessary service shows me a complete and total lack of empathy, which is, of course, sociopathic. He doesn't seem to much care about other people, ordinary people, who he's supposed to represent. He has insisted he can't get rid of the 5% VAT on energy, which he promised faithfully as one of the steps for Brexit. They said one of the things that we can do is on record, you can check it yourself, we can get rid of the 5% VAT. Now he says he can't afford it, but he can afford £2 billion that he sent to the Ukraine. An argument between the Ukraine and the Russian Federation, which frankly has nothing to do with the British taxpayer. British interests are not threatened at all. You might take one view, you may take another, and I've done videos on this subject, but that's not the point at issue. We can't afford £2 billion. If we've got £2 billion, let's take the 5% off energy. Partygate. Well, you know, we've gone on and on and on about Partygate, or the press have. I haven't mentioned much of it because I was one of the foremost cheaters. I was having parties all the way through lockdown because I knew the whole thing was rubbish to start with. But he's the one that made the laws. He made the laws. People were fined very heavily for breaking the laws. Ordinary people sitting on park benches, walking the dog, single mums, whatever it was, students. And he's now been caught having parties in lockdown. And what he should do is say, look, obviously it was very complicated. Even I fell for it. I didn't understand it. I didn't think I was breaking the law, but I obviously was. The best thing to do on this is draw a veil over it and return all the fines that we put out on people for breaking the lockdown rules and regulations, as I've done it myself, and I should be Caesar's wife when it comes to these matters. He doesn't do that because he doesn't care. He doesn't care. He's cross he got caught and was reckoned to be guilty of breaking his own rules, but he doesn't really deep down care. There's no shame, otherwise he would have dealt with it in the manner aforesaid. A few months ago, he was on record, and goodness me, didn't it take some time to say, the experimental spike protein therapy, sometimes known for short as the jab, will not stop you contracting COVID, and it won't stop the transmission. These are the Prime Minister's words. They were mine from the very beginning, but leave that aside. This is not about me. It's about the Prime Minister. This is what he actually said. But a couple of days ago, he was interviewed by Nick Ferrari, and he was still claiming that the best thing to do for people to do was to get the jab. When he knows it doesn't work. He's admitted it doesn't work. Or it doesn't work as much as they hoped it might. This has been admitted by everybody. This isn't sort of an off-the-wall weird opinion, but he's still recommending it. We're now the highest tax nation since the war. Our tax thresholds are the highest since the war. And yet, he has made no effort at all to do anything about overspending. So we still have high-speed rail. We still have the high-speed rail, which is reckoned now to be costing 100 billion. He's had every opportunity to actually cancel that and save some money, but he hasn't done it. And who's suffering? He's not suffering. He's a rich man. He's a very rich man. And most of his cronies are very rich men. But if you're an ordinary old age pensioner living in Pontefract or Hull or somewhere like that, and you're being taxed, or you're on the minimum wage and all the rest of it, that is a luxury that we can ill spare, we can ill afford. But he does nothing about it. As I say, he's lacking any form of empathy. Does that make him a sociopath? I don't know. You look it up and see what you think. He also got elected on ticket, did he not? Illegal immigration is going to stop. He's going to cut immigration. Well, they pour into Dover in their thousands on a weekly basis. And moreover, this is something he could easily do something about. This is government policy. He sends out border patrol boats into the mid-channel, and he sends out commandeered Royal National Lifeboat Institution boats to actually bring them ashore. He brings them ashore, he puts them in 4-star, 3 and 4-star hotels. He makes sure that they've got 3 meals a day and medical care. This is a man who has some form of personality disorder. And I think he sent something like 1,500 to a little village not far from me, Linton on News, a little village of no more than 500 people. The people he should be looking after, the sort of people he should be representing, the sort of people who voted for him, the sort of people who believed what he said. Let's have a look at net zero. It's his own personal baby, net zero, and the rest of the Conservative Party are getting fed up with it, and they would have voted him down on the vote of confidence if there weren't a lot of other sociopaths and psychopaths waiting in the wings, people like Jeremy Hunt and Michael Gove. And that's the terror of the Conservative Party. If they get rid of this guy with a personality disorder, they've got plenty more to choose from. Not very helpful, is it? Let me just run that past you again, net zero. Just bear in mind what the atmosphere consists of, because it seems mainstream media journalists don't have a clue. The atmosphere consists of 0.03% carbon dioxide. Man-made carbon dioxide, as an addition to into that, to make that up, is reckoned to be round about 3% of that figure of 0.03%. Britain is reckoned to produce 1% of that. All right, so it's insignificant. It's totally insignificant. It can't make the slightest bit of difference, Britain going to net zero. That's just the numbers. Any 10-year-old can do that on a pocket calculator. It's absolute madness, but he's staying with it to the detriment of our industry and our people and the cost of our energy. And I'm going to finish off, and the other thing it is, of course, does with that, he goes to climate conferences in private jets. This shows he doesn't care. And this comes up perhaps a little bit, doesn't it? He's a psychopath. The man who doesn't care, who can't accept he's done something wrong. The man, these nutters who've done all sorts of terrible things. And when they end up in the dock, they just don't understand that they've done anything wrong, because then that's not wrong. To Boris, that isn't wrong. Flying to a climate conference in his private jet isn't wrong in his mind. Don't tell me that's not a personality disorder. And finally, I'll go with Julian Assange, a journalist who is sending back to virtual certain death in solitary confinement in a disgusting American jail with no serious trial whatsoever. And he's been banked up in solitary now for the last 3 years in Belmarsh. He could stop that with a flick of his fingers. He could stop it tomorrow morning, repatriate Julian Assange to Australia. He's an Australian national. He won't do that. And why won't he do that? Because he's got a personality disorder. You work out what that personality disorder is. Is he a sociopath? Is he a psychopath? Or is he a schizophrenic with a bit of both? I don't know. Look it up and see what you think. Share your thoughts with me. I'm interested to hear them. I think he's barking mad. Well, greetings to you. As you know, social media was a wonderful invention so that we could all communicate with each other and share our views, and share views that aren't necessarily in line with the establishment, the global establishment, which is run mainly by banks and big pharma. So I've been doing my best to do that, but I am increasingly being shadow banned or taken down, and so are many others. So beware of that, and I will be tagging anything I do in the future with various sources and various channels, so that you will know, well, I've been censored from this, but I've been censored, but you can find it somewhere else. So the whole thing can continue. And I think some of these new channels, which aren't owned by the establishment or influenced by the establishment, banks and big pharma and all the rest, you'll be able to follow the facts. And that doesn't mean fact checkers, of course, which are owned by the establishment. So I just thought I'd give you the heads up on that. And thank you for your sponsorship and your support. I thank you for it. Without you and the information that sometimes you people send me, I couldn't continue. Thank you again. As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I automatically share it with you. So surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.